The other topic which has been agitating people, what happened in the subcontinent following the terror attack in Pahalgam, Kashmir, on the 22nd of April, when 26 holidaymakers, civilians for the most part, who happened to be on holiday in a rather tranquil meadow in a remote part of Kashmir, north of the hill station of Pahalgam, were gunned down in cold blood, and were gunned down rather ruthlessly and in a very cynical, carefully planned and well-crafted operation in which the terrorists came dressed in army uniforms, went from individual holidaymaker to individual holidaymaker, asking them what their religion was. When the people answered Hindu, they were promptly shot between the eyes. When people refused to answer, they were asked to recite the kalima, which those who couldn't do were then proceeded to be shot, and some others had their trousers pulled down to identify them circumcised. When one distraught wife screamed, "Kill me too," the killer said, "No, go back and tell Modi, go back and tell the Indians." So it was very, very much a nasty, malicious, evil slaughter, intended not just to obviously take 26 lives, but also to destroy the extraordinary boom that had been in tourism to Kashmir, and the thriving Kashmiri economy would take a setback, so that might perhaps help increase or create alienation amongst the local populace. And then the hope, very clearly from the manner of these executions, was that there would be a backlash in the rest of India to the killings on religious grounds, and that perhaps Hindus would go around saying, well, since these people killed us because we're Hindu, we're going to kill Muslims in revenge, which fortunately didn't happen. Indians stayed united, condemned the horror unitedly, and India rose up as one to signal to the government that we must react to terrorism. I myself, as an opposition MP, wrote an op-ed in one of India's leading newspapers, the Express, which was headlined, "Hit hard, hit smart." It was clear that what the experts call a kinetic action was going to be necessary, that there would have to be a physical response, simply because we tried everything else for 37 years and nothing had worked. The Pakistanis turned terrorists against us the moment the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan. There were lots of unemployed young men with beards and Kalashnikovs who could be channeled in certain directions, and there were people turned against India, particularly in Kashmir, and people turned against Afghanistan. As you know, by 1995, Afghanistan had fallen to the Taliban, the wholly owned creation of the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI, and the people of Kashmir suffered horrendous loss of lives in violence caused by terrorists throughout the 90s and into the early years of the century. Many of you will remember the horrors of Mumbai, 26/11/2008, when 270 innocent people were killed. But in an operation which Pakistan denied having anything to do with, until one of the terrorists was captured alive, and not only was he identified, his home address, where he lived, what his name was, who he was trained by, and where he was trained, everything came out until that denial was no longer credible. In any case, Western intelligence agencies also recorded the chilling voice of the Pakistani handler giving minute-by-minute instructions to the killers in Mumbai to move from room to room, killing people, because he was watching Indian television and telling them what to do. This horror resulted in a joint international effort to investigate, to compile a dossier which was given to the Pakistanis, and to this day, 17 years later, no one has been prosecuted, no one has been punished in Pakistan. The same evidence used by the Americans inculpated two Pakistani or people of Pakistani origin in America who have been convicted since, one of whom has been extradited to India thereafter. But the fact is that the same evidence did not lead to any prosecution in Pakistan. So that didn't work. The second thing that the Pakistanis keep calling for, since the international investigation has been discredited, is a joint investigation. Well, that's been tried too. in 2015, when the Pakistanis attacked Pathankot in India, the Pathankot airbase, our Prime Minister, who just made an impromptu and very affectionate visit to his Pakistani counterpart, whose birthday was on December 25 the previous year, and whose granddaughter's wedding he'd attended, he called the Prime Minister and said, surely you had nothing to do with this, why didn't you join the investigation? And so Pakistani intelligence showed up as an Indian airbase, much to the horror of Indian intelligence, and then went back to Pakistan and said, oh, the Indians did it to themselves, which, as you can imagine, led to a terrible sense of betrayal in India and a conviction on the part of the government that the Pakistanis were not serious about dealing with the terrorism emanating from their territory, and other solutions would have to be found. This is what led to a succession of more decisive actions, surgical strikes across the border, a terrorist attack in 2019 that led to an air attack on a terrorist base in a place called Balakot in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And then finally, this decision to react to this particular attack with something more. And that something more was an air raid missile raid on 9 known terrorist camps. Now, the government of India took pains to signal both to the Pakistanis and to the world. They told the Pakistanis and they announced to the world that this was very carefully calibrated. So it was not just hit hard, it was hit smart, as I wanted them to. That they had only hit bases of well-known terrorist organizations listed by the United Nations Terrorism Committee and also on the State Department US wanted terrorist list. And that they had taken care not to hit any Pakistan government sites or any Pakistan military sites in that first strike on the 6th and 7th of May. And they told the Pakistanis, if you leave well enough alone, we're done. But if you hit, we will hit you back. And that's exactly what transpired. They hit rather indiscriminately. They killed some nuns in the Carmelites convent in Poonch in Srinagar. They hit a Sikh Gurudwara, killing a number of Sikh worshippers. And they hit civilians in their homes and on the streets. India then retaliated, not quite in kind. We didn't target the civilians, but we did hit military targets, which we had eschewed on the first day. And on the night of the 9th, 10th, we successfully damaged 11 Pakistani air bases, which, again, the photographs are available on commercial, publicly available satellite television, showing the extent of damage that was caused. Pakistan the next morning called it and said they'd like to call it off. And we said, we've been saying all along, if you hit, we hit, and you stop, we stop. We want to stop, we'll stop. And that was that. That was the end of the war. So I stress a couple of things in this narrative. The first is that there was no need for anyone to persuade us to stop, because from the very beginning, we had signaled a desire to stop at the first opportunity. Second, there was no need to sort of call for mediation or whatever, because the notion of mediation implies equivalence, and there can be no equivalence between terrorists and their innocent civilian victims, and there can be no equivalence between a state that harbors, incubates terrorism, and a state exercising its right of self-defense, which is why India was simply not inclined to indulge in any talk of mediation. I led one of the delegations that the government sent, 7 delegations, all multi-party. My own delegation had 8 people, of whom we represented 5 political parties, 8 states, and 3 different religions. And that was very much the intention was to convey very clearly that India was united, that across these very many visible diversities, we were one in standing up against terrorism. At the same time, we wanted to get away from this narrative that, oh, it's the Indians and Pakistanis doing it to each other all the time. Sorry, this is not about any state conflict. India is not interested in conflict with Pakistan. We are focused on our development, on our growth, on our technology, on the transformation and the well-being of our people. We do not wish to be distracted by conflict with anybody. And we're very happy to leave the Pakistanis alone if they will leave us alone. The problem is they are not content to leave us alone. They are what's called a revisionist power. They want to change the arrangements in the subcontinent, and they want to make sure that the strategy minuted by a Pakistani general way back in the 1980s and since made public, of bleeding India to death by 1,000 cuts. But that particular strategy would continue to be followed. And therefore, I'm afraid we've been confronting this for 36 years with mounting levels of exasperation. I know that Pakistan also sent a couple of delegations out. Young Bilawal Bhutto, whom I've met, is a very pleasant young man, essentially seemed to have made two major points. First, we didn't do this. The Indians made an unprovoked attack. I think I've given you enough reasons to indicate why we believe there was no doubt who had done it, but there was also one further detail which I haven't mentioned. Within 45 minutes of the terror attack, before it was public knowledge, before it was in any news, because there were no journalists around when the killings happened, within 45 minutes, credit had been claimed by a group called the Resistance Front, which is a well-known proxy for the Lashkar-e-Toiba, based in Pakistan, in a place called Muridke, and the Resistance Front not only made that claim, but went on to reiterate that claim 24 hours later on their official website. So there is no doubt the Resistance Front is a group we had been complaining about to the UN Terrorism Committee in 2023 and 2024, so it's not exactly an unknown entity. So that was another major reason. And then, of course, our intelligence people are no fools. They collated the CCTV footage and identified at least 3 of the perpetrators, 2 of whom, by photographs, they were able to identify the names of them because they've been involved in previous terror attacks, were indeed Pakistanis. One was a Kashmiri who had been known to have exfiltrated the language the police like to use into Pakistan for training, and who had clearly been sent back to do this dirty deed. So I want to show you, number one, that India is a responsible state that wouldn't have done this without being 100% certain that it knew what it was responding to, but equally that it did so in a very measured way and only targeting terror sites. The second argument that the Pakistani delegations have been using is, we're also victims of terrorism, and poor Bilawal says, I lost my mother to terrorism as well. And I feel deeply sorry for the young man. He should not have had to lose his mother to terrorism. But we didn't create that problem. That problem was created in and by some of the very elements on whose behalf he's speaking now. The Pakistani ISI that created these terror groups to serve the purposes of their policy towards Afghanistan and towards India. They are the ones who have based, trained, armed, financed, equipped and deployed these terrorists for 37 years. So it's a bit much, I'm afraid. It's very sad, but at the same time, it's as Hillary Clinton rather memorably said a dozen years ago when she was Secretary of State to the Pakistanis, you cannot breed a nest of vipers in your backyard and expect them only to bite your neighbors. So unfortunately, the old story of Dr. Frankenstein, build a monster that escapes your control, one faction of these radicalized Islamist fanatics decided Pakistan itself wasn't Islamist enough for their taste and turned against the ruling establishment there, and that's why some of these killings in Pakistan have been happening. So we sympathize, but we obviously would ask you to look at where the problem originated.